Previously, I talked about the God Delusion, the popular book by Richard Dawkins, in which he purported to provide reasons to believe that there is almost certainly no God, in his own words. This book has been tremendously popular among lay people, but the response from the scholarly community has been tepid, to say the least. And not just from Christians or other theists, but even from fellow atheists. In my previous video, I talked about Dr. Michael Ruse, one of the foremost atheist philosophers and debaters of our time, and how he was thoroughly disgusted with the book. You also have evolutionary geneticist Dr. H. Alan Rohr, also an atheist, who said, "I have no problem with where Dawkins arrived, but with how he got there. He agreed with Dawkins' atheism, but he thought that the defense that Dawkins gave in his book was just sloppy." Even when people have words of praise for the book, the words tend to be tepid, lukewarm, and they tend to show signs of not having thoroughly read his work. For example, Daniel Dennett said that the New York Times should lay off of Dawkins and just treat his book as though it was a popular treatise offering a light treatment of theism, when in fact Dawkins himself claimed to provide a very thorough analysis of the arguments for theism, and said that and purported to offer an argument for atheism that was, in his own words, unanswerable. Now, there's much that can be said about the book, and in fact I covered a good amount of the material in my previous video. Right now, though, I want to concentrate on what Dawkins himself describes as his core argument. Dawkins himself summarizes what he calls the central argument of his book on pages 157 and 158. It proceeds as follows. Tenet 1. One of the greatest challenges to the human intellect has been to explain how the complex, improbable appearance of design in the universe arises. On that point we can agree. However, this is really just an introductory statement, not a premise or an argument or a piece of data. Tenet number 2. The natural temptation is to attribute the appearance of design to actual design itself. I also agree with that point. However, again, this is not really an argument either way. Tenet 3. The temptation is a false one because the designer hypothesis immediately raises the larger problem of who designed the designer. On this point, I believe that Dawkins errs grievously. For one thing, the theistic argument is not that everything has to be designed, rather it's that every effect has a cause. That's a major distinction. Secondly, merely raising the question of who designed the designer is not itself fatal any more than raising the question of who designed the designer of a pocket watch is itself fatal to the notion that the pocket watch has been designed. It's a starting point for further philosophical inquiry and certainly a legitimate question to ask, but it itself is not a rebuttal. Having said that, let's set that aside for now. Let's, for the sake of argument, grant this point and proceed to the rest of his argument. Tenet 4. The most ingenious and powerful explanation is Darwinian evolution by natural selection. Again, I'm going to disagree with him at this point. I don't believe that Darwinian evolution is sufficient to explain the entire complexity of life, but for the sake of argument, let's grant this point. Tenet 5. We don't have an equivalent explanation for physics. I agree, which is why I have multiple videos that discuss the cosmic fine-tuning argument. Even atheist scholars like Richard Dawkins acknowledge that the universe exhibits tremendous signs of design. He attempts to explain that away, but he admits, as do physicists all over the world, that the universe gives every appearance of having been designed, having been fine-tuned to an incredible degree to allow life to exist. Tenet 6. We should not give up the hope of a better explanation arising in physics, something as powerful as Darwinism is for biology. This is the first of the two most glaring errors in Dawkins' central argument. This statement is not evidence, it's not even a philosophical argument. It is a statement of confidence. One might even say it's a declaration of faith. Faith in the notion that there is going to be an explanation, something that accounts for the appearance of design in the universe. We just don't know what it is yet. He is here saying that we don't have an explanation, but you just got to keep hoping that we're going to find one. That's not data. That's not even an argument. It's just saying we're going to find something somewhere, somehow. And from these 6 points, he arrives at his conclusion, which he states as, therefore, God almost certainly does not exist. This is the second of the two most glaring errors in his argument. How does this statement proceed from the first 6 tenets that we discussed? Quite simply, it does not. If anything, his own arguments show why this does not follow. He himself admitted that there is no explanation for the appearance of design in the universe. He just declared hope that we will find something, and based on that, he says that God almost certainly does not exist. Even if we grant that Darwinian evolution is more than capable of accounting for the appearance of biological design, and even if we grant the necessity of answering the question, who designed the designer, Dawkins' conclusion, namely that God almost certainly does not exist, still does not logically follow from his 6 tenets. How can it? The problem is that Dawkins started out with a destination in mind. In other words, he had a goal and decided to chart a path to it instead of going where the evidence pointed. That's not really my observation. It's also the observation of his fellow atheist, the evolutionary geneticist Dr. H. Alan Orr. Dr. Orr said that Dawkins has a preordained set of conclusions at which he is determined to arrive. Consequently, Dawkins uses any argument, however feeble, that seems to get him there, and the merit of various arguments appears judged largely by where they lead. In other words, if the arguments appear to point kinda in the direction he wants to go, he tosses it out there, regardless of whether those steps themselves constitute a legitimate path to his conclusion. Again, I remind you, that argument did not come, or that evaluation did not come from a Christian or even theist. It came from a fellow biologist, someone who argues strenuously for evolution, and who is sympathetic to his views, but not his arguments. These are just some of the reasons why I think that the God Delusion does not merit all the hype that it gets. This explains, among other reasons, why the scholarly community is not behind this book the way the general populace is, or the way many lay people are.